The story of David and Goliath is often told as a simple children's lesson about the little guy beating the giant. But the real story is far deeper, filled with historical tensions, personal struggles, cultural differences, and a powerful message about faith and identity. To truly understand what happened in the Valley of Elah, we have to step back and look at the world David and Goliath lived in. Because the victory did not begin with a sling and a stone, it began with the clash of two nations, two belief systems, and two very different kinds of strength. The nation of Israel was in a dark and uncertain time. They were constantly threatened by surrounding nations, especially the Philistines, who were an aggressive and technologically advanced warrior group that lived along the coastal plains of Canaan. The Philistines were known for their iron weaponry at a time when Israel had mostly bronze. They were feared for their military, their giants, and their brutal fighting style. They were not just enemies by territory, but by culture and faith. The Philistines worshipped gods like Dagon and Baal, and they believed their strength came from their idols. Israel, on the other hand, served one God, whose name is Yahweh. He had led them out of Egypt and promised them a land of their own. At this time, Israel was led by King Saul, a man who had once been brave but was now consumed by insecurity. Saul stood head and shoulders above most men, yet he was terrified of going into battle without the assurance of victory. His fear had grown so strong that even the presence of the Philistine army paralyzed him. The Israelites camped in the hills, the Philistines on the opposite side, and between them lay the Valley of Elah, a grassy bowl of land where both sides waited, staring at each other, afraid to move. This is where Goliath enters the story. Goliath was not just tall, he was a warrior from birth, trained for killing. He stood over 9 feet tall by ancient measurements, covered in bronze armor that alone weighed more than an average man. His spear was thick like a weaver's beam with an iron tip heavier than a bowling ball. He was the Philistine champion, meaning he had never lost a battle. He was brutal, confident, and arrogant. Twice a day for 40 days, Goliath walked out into the valley and challenged Israel to send a man to fight him. If he lost, the Philistines would serve Israel. If he won, Israel would become slaves of the Philistines. The soldiers trembled at the sight. Even Saul refused to face him. Every day, Goliath shouted insults not only at the army, but at Israel's God, mocking their faith and calling them cowards. Meanwhile, miles away, David lived a very different life. He was the youngest son of Jesse, a shepherd boy who spent his days watching sheep in the hills of Bethlehem. David was not the picture of a warrior. He was overlooked by his family, small in size, considered insignificant. But while David was unknown to people, he was deeply known by God. Out in the field alone with his sheep, David learned to pray, to sing, and to trust God with his whole heart. He defended his flock from lions and bears using only a sling and stones. He practiced accuracy daily, not because he expected to face giants, but because he believed every responsibility mattered. What no one saw was that God was training David long before the battle arrived. One day, David's father sent him to the battlefield to deliver food to his older brothers who were soldiers. When David arrived, he heard Goliath shouting his usual challenge and saw the entire Israelite army retreat in fear. Something inside David ignited. He could not understand why a man was allowed to insult the God of Israel without being confronted. While the soldiers saw an impossible monster, David saw disrespect against God's name. The soldiers whispered about a reward King Saul was offering to anyone who killed Goliath, including riches and a royal marriage, but none of them dared to step forward. To David, the reward did not matter. What mattered was honor. He asked why no one was doing anything, and his own brothers mocked him and accused him of being prideful. But David felt a calling deep in his spirit. When David told King Saul he would fight Goliath, Saul nearly laughed. David was young, inexperienced, and untrained, but David spoke with a boldness that did not come from himself. He told Saul about defending his sheep from wild animals and said, "The same God who delivered me then will deliver me now." Saul tried to dress David in royal armor, but David could barely move. He realized something powerful. You cannot fight a spiritual battle using someone else's armor. You must fight with what God has given you. David removed the armor and walked to the valley with only his sling, 5 smooth stones, and faith. Goliath laughed when he saw David approaching. To him, David was not a threat, just a boy with a stick and a bag. But David was not intimidated. He told Goliath that while the giant came with sword, spear, and armor, he came in the name of the Lord. David put a stone in his sling, swung it with precision, and released it. The stone flew with deadly force and struck Goliath directly in the forehead, sinking into bone. The giant fell face down to the ground, and with one final act of courage, David used Goliath's own sword to end his threat. The shocked Philistine army fled in terror, and Israel rose from fear into victory. This story is not just only strength versus weakness. It is about a God who sees differently than people do. Israel saw a giant too big to defeat. David saw a target too big to miss. The soldiers measured the size of Goliath. David measured the size of God. What looked like an underdog battle was truly a demonstration that God uses unexpected people to accomplish extraordinary things. David did not just win because he was skilled. He won because he trusted God and refused to bow to fear. The story of David and Goliath teaches us that sometimes the giants we face are not only people, but they are fear, rejection, self-doubt, addiction, shame, or failure. And there are some giants that taunt us every day. Some giants try to tell us we will never be enough. But the weapons God gives us, which are faith, courage, perseverance, and prayer, are stronger than anything that comes against us. Sometimes God allows giants in our path, not to show us how weak we are, but to reveal how powerful He is through us. David's victory also shows that preparation happens long before the battle. The habits we develop in quiet seasons prepare us for public battles. God trains us in small responsibilities so we can face great challenges. David's story marked the beginning of his rise to becoming king. That one battle changed not only his future, but the future of Israel. And today, thousands of years later, the story still stands as a reminder that no challenge is too great when God is involved, and no person is too small for God to use.